Hey, CNFers, it's that time of year. You're getting on a treadmill. You might even be hiring a personal trainer for that hot body of yours. But maybe your writing needs a boost, a personal trainer in its corner. That little something that'll just get you where you might need to go. If you're working on a book, an essay, query, book proposal, and you're ready to level up, why don't you email me, brendan@brendanomeara.com, and we'll start a dialogue. I'd be honored to help you get where you want to go.
Exactly. And that's where the magic happens, right? Like when a reader is able to connect those dots, like that's making me smile right now if you could see me. It's also hard because, I'm Italian, so we like to talk with our hands and just beat the horse dead. And I'm trying to really undo that.
Oh yes, this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I speak to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. I'm Brendan O'Meara. How's it going? It's that Atavistian time of the month where I speak with its featured writer. She is Christine Grimaldi, a DC-based journalist who has written a piece for the Atavist that marries memoir and reportage. I fucking hate that word. Let's just say journalism, okay? Spoiler alerts, as always, in the interview, so if you haven't read the piece, I encourage you to do so. Plan on it, and why wouldn't you? I mean, read the piece and then come and hang out with us. Sound good? Good. All right. We get into the idea of grifters in this country. Editing, of course, love of sentences, and a lot more. It's good stuff. But I want to remind you to keep the conversation going on Twitter, at CNFPod, or at Creative Nonfiction Podcast on Instagram. You can also support the podcast by becoming a paid member at patreon.com/CNFpod. As I say, the show is free, but it sure as hell ain't cheap. Members get transcripts, chances to ask questions of future guests, special podcasts, you name it. Shop around. It might tickle your fancy. Ew. Free ways to support the show. You can leave a kind review or rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Written reviews for our little podcast that could go a long way towards validating the enterprise, and also for the wayward CNFer just passing by. We've stalled out quite a bit in terms of reviews. It'd be great to ramp that up again. Consider it. Doesn't take that long. Show notes in my Up to 11 monthly newsletter can be found at brendanomeara.com. Hey. Once a month, no spam. So far as I can tell, you can't beat it. Another little note here. Support for the Creative Nonfiction Podcast is brought to you by West Virginia Wesleyan College's low residency MFA in Creative Writing, now in its 10th or 11th year. This affordable program boasts a low student-to-faculty ratio and a strong sense of community. What is it, Brendan? Is it the 10th year or the 11th? I'm pretty sure it's the 11th. Recent CNF faculty include Randon Billings-Noble, Jeremy Jones, and CNF pod alum Sarah Einstein. There's also fiction and poetry tracks, where recent faculty including Ashley Bryant-Phillips and Jacinta Townsend, as well as Diane Gilliam and Savannah Sipple. No matter your discipline, if you're looking to up your craft or maybe even learn a new one, consider West Virginia Wesleyan right in the heart of Appalachia. Visit mfa.wvwc.edu for more information and dates of enrollment. So before we get to Christine, I sat down with the lead editor of the piece, Editor-in-Chief Sayward Darby. We talked for a while, and I think this might be a thing going forward. The last year, in the first year of these Atavistian pods, we usually took 5 to 10 minutes to tease the story. But Sayward and I get into some stuff, man. And to quote rock rap philosopher Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit, we kept on rolling, baby. You know what time it is. Roof. Yeah. Nice. So we got a new one. This is great. In another year, this is year 2 of us doing this. So this is fun. I'm glad we're still doing this, and it feels like it's something of value to you, and it's certainly of value to me.
Yeah, no, it's also fun to just like kind of introduce the stories in this way and talk about them a little bit. It's always, it's one thing to tweet about them. It's one thing to email people about them, but it's nice to be able to talk about them. So,
of course. Now, Sayward, as we're still, this is something I always kind of like to do, usually in January, maybe the first week or two of February when I have people on the show. It's the beginning of the year, and I always like to get someone's impressions of how they're processing the new year, whether that's resolutions, whether you believe in that or not, or goals. And maybe for you as, professionally and personally, what are some things that you're looking to sharpen the saw on and process in 2022?
Gosh, it's a great question. The Atavist had a really fantastic year in 2021.
So dynamic. It was really dynamic.
Super dynamic. I agree. And we relaunched the website in April, and we've had, this new look, which is really exciting. We published some stories that went, just did incredibly well for us from a traffic standpoint. We sold some projects for film and TV. It was just a really, really exciting year. Oh, we did our first ever narrative podcast in addition to doing this podcast with you. It was just a very exciting and dynamic year for us. So I think, in 2022, I'm excited to build on that, and to, find different ways to do what we do, thinking about different formats, thinking about different types of collaborations, partnerships, things like that. I'm definitely, given the size and kind of scale of what the Atavist does, I never want to try to do too much. It's more like, what can we do that helps us grow, whether that means, from a financial standpoint or a creative standpoint or both, ideally, that isn't going to it risk diminishing what we already do so well. So how do we build as opposed to just how do we, try to do more because it's there and, you can do more. That just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. So yeah, I don't have anything specific that I can tease here. We obviously have a ton of really great stories assigned, and, we're working with some really amazing people, and I have some partnerships in mind, some hopes on that front, for co-publishing and things like that. We'd love to do another podcast. We do have a concept that's out there that's getting pitched to various companies. Yeah. And then, for me, it's always very important too, to think about, diversifying our roster of writers, which is something that, every media outfit is dealing with to one extent or another. And for us, we've now gotten, this is the third year in a row, if I'm not mistaken, that we had gender parity amongst our writers. And we obviously have a ton of diversity amongst our other contributors, like illustrators and photographers. But, continuing to really keep tabs on who's writing for us, what they're writing about, and, always working to, diversify, but also just, add layers of complexity to the types of stories that we tell. So there's that. And then, on a personal, I don't do resolutions or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I was inspired this year. This is super corny, but I'm standing by it. So slightly sad note to begin the point on, a friend of mine passed away at the end of last year after fighting brain cancer for a year. And
I lost a friend to brain cancer a couple of years ago too. He's 30 years old. It's
exactly
a crime.
Yeah.
It's a crime.
Yeah. Oh. Just really, really awful. And in the process of talking to or seeing people who knew him, I participated in a Zoom memorial, and somebody mentioned that in the last year of his life, he had been encouraging his friends to tell him about daily ordinary joys that they were experiencing. And I'm really not a terribly sentimental person, but for whatever reason, I was I love that. And so I actually have a little notebook, and every day I try to write down one ordinary joy, something that makes me feel really happy. I was upstate in New York a few weeks ago, and one of them was sinking my boot into a deep, fresh snow. And awesome. As a journalist, one day I'm looking at my little notebook. I said, the willingness of strangers to speak honestly, candidly, and generously with me, things like that. And so that's probably the closest I've ever come in a new year to, embracing some kind of, project related to the fact that we are starting another cycle around the sun. So yeah, that's where I am right now in 2022.
Well, that's great. When I recently had a conversation with Rachel Krantz, who has a new memoir out called Open, a memoir, an uncensored memoir of love, liberation, and non-monogamy, and we were talking about awareness and meditation and everything, and we just like kind of spitballing back and forth. And I told her, like, something that I tend to do, I always journal in the morning in a different journal, and then at the end of the day in my more bullet journal planner thing, I have like what I call is more or less a daily download, just a few sentences at the end of the day, an analog way to close the day off, kind of a ritualistic thing that kind of triggers to my mind, okay, day's done. And part of that, and it is more of a sensory download. So I think of what is a cool thing I saw, touched, heard, smelled, felt over the course of a day. And
I love that.
And it's like garlic on the oil, on a hike, touching a tree covered in moss. And it's just I don't know, it's just kind of a cool way that I've found to be like more connected in a sensory way throughout the world. And then kind of read back on it. I found it really works, and I think it's kind of a cool way to try to connect with the world in a very sort of tactile way, if that makes any sense.
It absolutely does. And I love that. And I think, sometimes, or at least my understanding of this Daily Ordinary Joy project and kind of, why he was doing it and why friends were sharing those things with him was so that you were thinking about those small things, the feel of something, smell of something, and realizing how little things, can bring you happiness, even if just for, a split second, and make you feel more connected. I think that's exactly the way to think about it. So I think that I'm a terrible journaler. Like, I'm just the worst. I've never been good at keeping one. I was horrible. As a little girl, it was kind of like, oh, I should have a diary. Every girl has a diary. And the number of diaries in my parents' house that have like 2 or 3 pages filled in, and then the rest just completely empty. Astronomical, just a tremendous waste of paper. And this is something where I feel like it's just jotting down something small, but also at the same time, like kind of forcing me to think about my day in this more intimate sense. And I really, so far, I've really enjoyed doing it. And I have successfully done it every day. We'll see how that goes for the rest of this year. Ask me in a month and we'll see how many days I've missed by then. But yeah.
Well, that's great. I've probably told you this, and I know I've told the audience innumerable times that I've had a journal since I was 16, 17 years old. So it's like 25-year thing that I've done. And part of the reason why I think it stuck and is not a thing that became 1 or 2 pages and then kind of giving up is that it started. So I named it from day one. It was the O'Mara Chronicles. Haha. But the idea was, so my best friend, who is still, we've lost some touch just from geography and life, but I consider him my best friend. And in high school, he did luge, the thing where you slide down the ice and everything. So he was on the Olympic track at the time in high school. And so he was forced to spend several months, definitely several weeks, sometimes several months away from school. So I started this journal to chronicle every day that he was missing. And then wherever he was in Europe, the first edition of the Chronicles, I mailed it to him to catch him up on it. So actually my journaling practice started as this act of quote unquote service to keep my friend abreast of what was going on in a semi-humorous way. And then when he got back and he was no longer on the road as much, I just the habit was formed and I just kept going anyway to kind of just have a log of what was going on in my life day to day. And that, of course, has evolved over 25 years. But it started as this thing of keeping track for a friend, not for me, but for somebody else. And that ingrained the habit. So I don't know if there's any lesson there, but maybe it's like, okay, maybe if you reframe it in this idea that it's for something else other than yourself, then maybe that's how you can imprint the habit of journaling.
Yeah, I actually really like that. And I'd never thought about that. But obviously I'm not doing this, for someone per se. But I just really liked the idea. And I, at this point, kind of doing it in someone's memory to a certain extent. And maybe that was just the push I needed to do something on a daily basis. And I'm also, like there was one day where I realized I had just been too busy seeing a friend and walking our dogs in the snow that I just hadn't thought to write anything. And so the next day I was like, daily ordinary joy is being like so wrapped up in the day that you're having that you forget to write something in your journal, just not applying pressure. I think that's the other thing is, I'm a person who, if I say I'm going to do something, I then put a lot of pressure on myself to do it. And so, yeah, not, putting too much pressure on myself is probably a good thing too.
Oh, for sure. Oh, that's great. And so we can segue into the piece of the month, starting the first one that's a kind of officially published in 2022 by Christine Grimaldi. And this piece is a little, in my experience of the past year or so of doing these with you, it's a little more memoiristic. Of course, there's the journalistic approach to it, but it does have a personal thread through it that we haven't seen in a little while. So I wanted to maybe get your impressions of what it was like for you to accept something that had that memoiristic spine, for the Atavist, and what that contributed to this piece.
The story is so fascinating. And we do probably one of these type stories a year or so. The last one that really jumps to mind, Searching for Mr. X, was to a certain extent, but really the last one I can think of is Castles in the Sky, which came out in November of 2020. I'm sorry, I'm like, the pandemic has completely screwed with my sense of time.
Yeah.
And then
100%.
the year before, year before that, there was one in December 2019 called Lost in Summerland. And this new piece, The Shadow and the Ghost, is very much in keeping with those stories, which, as you say, blends memoir and some very deeply personal stuff with a more journalistic approach, a question. And in this case, I don't want to give too much away, but the writer has this beloved grandmother. And one of the things that struck me when she first pitched it was the way she described her relationship with her grandmother. She referred to her grandmother as her soulmate. Mm-hmm. And I was very, that kind of stopped me in my tracks, because I'd never heard someone refer to, either a parent or a grandparent that way. That jumped off the page, so to speak, to me, because I was like, wow, that's a special relationship. Like, if that's something, that you hold that dear, that, you're describing it like that. And sort of the twist is that, she thought that she and her grandmother shared pretty much everything. And then it turns out that her grandmother had a secret, more or less, about her own childhood that after she'd passed away, Christine found out about, and then has dedicated years to trying to understand and be able to tell the story of. And so, her relationship with her grandmother alone was something that I was admittedly just very, very interested in knowing more about, and why it had meant so much to her, why it had been so special. But then, the fact that it turned out there was this huge gap in her knowledge of this person who she considers her soulmate. And she was seeking to fill that in. So I was very moved by just the whole, every aspect of it, quite frankly. And then the other piece of, and this is purely, geographical, for lack of a better way of putting it, a lot of what takes place in this story takes place in a neighborhood just south of where I live. So when Christine pitched it, and Christine lives in Washington, D.C., a lot of the story takes place in Brooklyn. I was immediately like, I have to walk down there. I was like, I have to go see the, specific addresses where, some admittedly kind of terrible things happened. And I'm a big sucker for stories like that, not specifically about Brooklyn, but about any place where, the story is in part about the actual location where someone is. And it's a location where people still are. And then it's, kind of like peeling back the layers, basically, of who has lived there, what their lives have been like. And I found that to be, another really compelling aspect of the pitch. So we said yes.
To that point of a soulmate, subverting the trope of a soulmate, that really resonated with me, because with no disrespect intended to my spouse, who I married 11 years ago, I often feel like my soulmate, and I alluded to this earlier, was my buddy Pete that I wrote that journal for. Like, in more ways than not, I almost find that like he's kind of like my kindred soulmate, and there's nothing romantic there at all in the traditional sense. It's just like he and I have just been on a wavelength unlike anyone I've ever met, and that is like no disrespect to my wife, but it's just like we associate soulmates with this person that we marry, and maybe that is the case for some people, but I think there is immense value in saying like sometimes that soulmate might be just a really good friend, and it might be a grandmother, and it was really nice to hear that in Christine's piece and hear you echo that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And, it's not romantic, right? I mean, there are romances that happen in the story. There are people who do fall in love in a more traditional sense. But just the fact that her depth of love for her grandmother, ran so and runs so incredibly deep. And, Christine too is in a, relationship, has a spouse, and I'm certain she would say no disrespect to him. But I don't know. I was just very mesmerized by the way she described her childhood with her grandmother. That alone kind of sucked me in. Would that have made for an Atavist story? Probably not. But then on top of that, her grandmother had this just really monumental kind of story that she had been a part of as a child. And it really allowed Christine to, look at her own self and her feelings toward her grandmother. And it then allowed her to delve into some really fascinating history and history of the United States, history in Italy, history of immigration here, history of a religious movement, just all kinds of stuff that really, bring the story to life. And yeah, it just has a really special mix of elements. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know she's keen to write a book at some point about this, and I feel like she definitely has the goods to do that.
Now, there's a moment early in the story, and I spoke with Christine a few hours ago, and I asked her about this idea of her grandmother's secret was her inheritance, and she was quick to say that that was something that Sayward inserted in as a note. And I wanted to get your sense of what triggered you to sort of inject that into the story, and for her to then adopt it as part of the theme that really sets the story in motion.
Yeah, well, I was very interested as I was reading, earlier drafts of the story and talking to Christine, and we had lots of long phone calls, talking about various parts of the story and characters in the story and everything. This idea that her grandmother gave her so much in life, so much love, so many memories, so many lessons. And then, she died and she left this gap. But the gap was in and of itself a type of gift, because, what Christine had decided to do for a living as a writer, as a reporter, she had the tools to fill in that gap. And so this idea of inheritance, not necessarily as something that is concrete, that is discrete, but maybe something that gives you a sense of purpose, gives you something to do, actively. And I just thought that it was one of those things. It's very kind of her to say that, I inserted that in a note. It's not like it, came out of my own random thoughts. It was because I think this was what she was at the time in this phase of editing getting at, right? She was writing a lot around this idea of my grandmother gave me something, and I was it gave me something to do. And that is something that without her and without this being a secret, I would not have had. And so I think more than anything, I just used the word inheritance for the first time. And so you were talking about sort of subverting tropes, right? Or expectations. And in this case, subverting what we mean traditionally by inheritance. We're not talking about money. We're not talking about items. We're not talking about a name, right? Your familial name. We are talking about something that takes doing to ultimately understand, but is no less of a gift. And so to me, like that was what Christine was, trying to say. And my job as an editor is to kind of help shape things into, more succinct language at times. And I think that it definitely helps frame the piece and helps frame, what we see Christine doing throughout the piece, because it toggles, between more present day, or in some cases her childhood, and, the distant past. And, kind of using this idea that her grandmother had given her something that she was then, working to understand, and sort of framing that as her inheritance. I think helps the reader really understand what's going on in the piece.
Hearing you talk about that and the secret being an inheritance, it kind of reminded me of in the final Harry Potter book, where Dumbledore gives Harry, Hermione, and Ron sort of very cryptic inheritances to help them find their way. And it just popped into my head right now. And it's just like, okay, yeah, it is a little cryptic, and it's not just handing you something on the plate, but this idea of, here are some clues to fill in the holes. I can't help you anymore because I'm gone. But here, I think, are the things that might lead you down the right road to find the answers you're looking for, whether in my story, and then, of course, bridging it to your own through generations, right? It had that vibe, right?
Yeah. I mean, I will confess that I've never read a Harry Potter book or seen a Harry Potter movie. So, like, I vaguely know who those characters are. But yes, it sounds like a very good comparison, the way you describe it. In this case, it wasn't that her grandmother had given her clues or, kind of, it certainly hadn't prepared, this wasn't like some conscious idea that she had. I don't think that, well, when I'm gone, like Christine will have, these tools to understand my secret. I think it's more, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for. Here I am. I need an editor to help me find my words. I think that, she made Christine into the person that she was, right? Like, and is. They used to watch 2020 together every week. And, she really helped Christine, find this like love of journalism. She also made Christine the, sort of compassionate person that she is, and, shaped her in all these different ways that then when she became aware of this secret, she was ready to be able to go down the path of finding answers and understanding this thing. And so, it's just thinking about inheritance in this more broad sense, and also kind of multifaceted sense about, what the people who love us and leave us, who leave us behind at some point, what they give us and what we take away from our relationship with them. Just really kind of, I don't know, blowing that idea open in a way. So yeah, I mean, it's just a really special story, I think.
Yeah. And Christina and I got to talking about what this country lends itself to the grift and the grifter, and people looking to take advantage of people in a vulnerable states, and someone who's kind of a snake sweeping in. It goes back centuries. And she even said, like, America itself might be the ultimate grift. How did the idea of the grift and America maybe as a grift maybe cross your mind?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is definitely something I thought about a lot. And we talked about, too, at various points that, this character in the story who goes by the name Reverend Mother, who's a religious figurehead who really shaped Christine's grandmother's life. She's the kind of person, fast forward to today, and you can imagine her being, what are the snake oil salesmen and women of the 21st century, where, somebody who is peddling myths, who is peddling conspiracy theories, all because it gives them a sense of importance and superiority and, a position of power in one way or another. And is also taking advantage of other people's vulnerabilities. And this is something, I mean, yeah, we just through every phase of American history, there have been people like this in any number of, parts of our culture, whether you're talking about religion, you're talking about the economy, you're talking about, just kind of society, the arts, like just any number of places. And I think, Christine has a great line in the piece where she talks about, the myth of the American dream, versus American reality. It reminded me of this class that I took in college approximately 25 centuries ago, called American Dreams, American Realities. Point being, the whole class was framed around looking at the founding myths of America and the way that they have manifested over the centuries. And so, certainly religion played a huge role in that, kind of a beacon on the hill, but also, this idea of prosperity gospel, and all of these things that we continue to see, if not articulated in exactly that way, continue to really hold a lot of power over people and to shape immigrant experiences, especially. And I appreciate Christine saying that, America might be the ultimate grift, because I think there's really something to that. And that's a thought that's going to just fester in my mind now. Mm-hmm. But no, this was the other really beautiful thing about this story. It's so personal, right? It is very much about Christine and her grandmother and a family, a very specific people. But at the same time, it's a story that I think lingers with you because there are ways in which you're like, God, this feels pretty universal. And, I'm not Italian Catholic or Italian Pentecostal, both of which, are religions that played into Christine and her grandmother's lives. But, I was raised in a pretty conservative place where religion was really important. And I went to Catholic school for 9 years. And so there was also, these elements of my interest was like thinking back on my own experience with religion as a child and how it shaped me, for better or for worse. And I think that that's something that a lot of people can relate to. And even if they can't relate to it from a Christianity perspective, they can potentially relate to it from the standpoint of what is something in my life that felt religious, felt like it was so consuming of my time, of my family's time. It so defined who we were, and thinking back on why was that? What was my family hoping to get out of it? What were the people who were in charge hoping to get out of it? And I think, yeah, so even if you're not an Italian immigrant from, Naples or have, that lineage, there are still things about this story that are going to, tap into something. And I do think it's in many ways like a story for the Trump era as well, which I still really do think we're in, because bigotry and discrimination and the process of becoming white in America, who gets to become white, who doesn't get to become white, and, why whiteness as, a measure of power is such a powerful force for people, like a thing that they want to have some piece of. And that all comes to bear in this piece, over the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, in those flashbacks. But then also, I think is going to feel really familiar to readers. Yeah, it's a story about everything.
Yeah, and getting to the point where it feels familiar to readers, like the grift is happening today. And she even notes, Christine even notes that there's a play that Reverend Mother produces, like the Birth of Our Lord Jesus Christ, a play in 12 parts. And basically she just plagiarized scenes in the Bible, apparently. And Christine writes, like, what hubris it took to copyright a story from the Bible with that level of confidence. In another era, Reverend Mother might have been a televangelist or religious Instagram influencer. So, like, there it is. It's bridging this grift from then to the grifts of today.
Right. And I mean, I'm personally interested very much so in, the way that people find these gurus, so to speak, find these people who are telling them what they want to hear, but also asking a lot of them. And that's something that, we still see now, whether it's in a more, traditional sense of, going to church or, being a part of a community, that, is more insular in whatever way. Or, you know, I mean, my gosh, like the amount of times I've gone down a rabbit hole on, you know, Instagram or something, following, you know, individuals who have basically built their entire livelihood on, you know, claiming to have authority about something that they don't really have authority on. You know, that to me is just, I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated. That's America in a nutshell, you know, fake it till you make it. Right. It's America in a nutshell, where it's like, you know, make money off of, you know, whatever you can, quite frankly. And I think, yeah, that moment in the piece is a really nice bridge to the present day. And, you know, showing the ways in which, yeah, this might be familiar, in all the ways that this piece might seem strange to people, because things about it are like, whoa, that's crazy. Like, I can't believe that happened. At the same time, you know, within the things that are unfamiliar are things that I think are really going to strike a chord.
And these conversations that you and I have ahead of talking to the writer, I'd be remiss if I didn't actually talk about some of the editing process of this. And Christine's early draft, her early draft that she submitted to you was 27,000 words. The final product is around 16,000. So we're cutting 30%. What was that process like of cutting that down, honing the focus, everything that goes around cutting something from that to this?
Yeah, this was an interesting editing process, because the 27,000 words she turned in were very good words. There were just moments where she wasn't trusting herself enough as a writer, where I felt like, you know, for instance, she would say something and then she would almost need to prove that what she just said was true, and not in a way that was, basically, to give an example, when I went back to her and I said, you know, your writing is so strong, this is such a compelling piece. We had some structural issues to talk about, but, you know, nothing insane. And then I was like, what we really need to do is cut. Like, it's just too long for the material. And I was like, cut all of the quotes from, you know, books or experts. Like, trust yourself as a writer. Trust yourself to convey to the reader the things that you as a writer have absorbed in your research. And so, you know, just go through, and unless you feel like something, you just can't live without it, strike it. Assume that your words are strong enough. So there was definitely that aspect of it. And then there were some parts where she was going down like, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, more like kind of personal rabbit holes of things that were important, but could be said in a much more succinct way. And so what I kept telling her was, save it for the book. Save it for the book. You'll have a book, and you can go down so many of these paths, go off on these tangents. You can have a whole chapter about, you know, this. And for the sake of, you know, really keeping the pace and, you know, depth of this piece, where, you know, of course it's an art, not a science, but like keeping it at a place where I felt like, you know, it was its natural shape. It wasn't so much that anything was bad. Nothing was bad. It was more, what are we doing here? What are we trying to achieve? What are the things that can, and I even said, you know, don't erase anything, save everything, because I think these are things that you can absolutely build on in a longer context. So yeah, it was a combination of like, trust yourself as a writer, because you are a good writer. And then also, you know, there are things you can save for the book, and things that will be more impactful and meaningful if you save them for the book, because you can actually go the length and distance you need with them. Whereas in, you know, the piece, it was like, well, you're going down this rabbit hole, but you're not quite getting to like where this feels like it's gone deep enough that it will mean something to the reader. Because if you did that, you would have to go so far that you're, you know, how do we get back to the spine of the story, you know? And so we had a lot of conversations about this, and it's not always the case that somebody has in mind that they will be writing a book at some point, you know, about the topic. And knowing that going into this was also really helpful, because it was just a reminder of, you know, think about the form, think about the platform, think about the audience, and then think about all the things that you can do when those aspects have changed. So yeah, it was a really fun editing process. I hope it was fun for Christine.
I think it was, because when I talked to her about it, she was like, I love the editing process. It's like the words are already there, and now all we're getting to do is make it better. And she was like all about it. Like it was great. Like it wasn't precious to her that what she had written was set in stone. She was just like, okay, here's the ore, and now let's like mine it for the best gold. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I tell her, and I tell writers this all the time, so much of my job is, talking to, like, if you think of it as like a sculpture, right? And the writer's like, guess what? I have this big hunk of clay that I'm going to do a thing with. And, I'm there to kind of help think about what should it look like? What's the, what shape should it take? What size are we talking? Is there something that it should maybe be looking like, a model, kind of thinking about that stuff before they've even started. Right. And then once they've actually done the shape, I'm getting in there with like the chisel and the little, I'm not an artist, but like whatever tools you use to like get those curves just right, to like scrape off that last little, like they've already done the heavy lifting, they've already done like the shaping that gives it, ultimately like the form that it needs. And I'm there to help, find, sometimes things need to be lopped off because, the thing's not quite holding together, it's tilting over or whatever. But in this case, especially, she shaped it. I looked at it and said, I think it can be tighter. I think it can be sleeker. And she went and cut out, 10,000 words or whatever it was. And then I went in and, helped with that detailing. Yeah, it was definitely, I mean, I love it when a writer, because I'm the same way about editing. I'm like, yes, please make it better. Tell me what's wrong.
Oh my God.
So
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because even though you cut those 10,000 words, the remaining body of work is energized by those cuts in some way, right? Exactly.
Yeah. And I always tell people better to write long than to write short, because we can talk about what needs to go.
Yeah.
And so, dump your thoughts and your all your sources and, put it all out there. Please make it organized, but yes, put it all out there. And in this case, there was also, it got to the point toward the end of the back and forth editing before we like went into fact checking and copy editing everything, where she would write me a note and she'd be like, should we add this back in or should I save it for the book? Or should we cut this and save it for the book? And I would reply, essentially, save it for the book or don't save it for the book. That's like, that was like the point we were getting to. Because at no point was it like, oh, this is like, doesn't matter or is meaningless or, really isn't doing much. It just wasn't right for the reported essay she was putting together. And so save it for the book became a little bit of a refrain.
It's like, yeah, kind of a mantra for this, like save it for the book, save it for the book. Fantastic. Well, Sayward, always a pleasure. This is great to unpack the piece, and by design, I wanted to, and it just happened this way, but kind of by design. It was great to actually talk a bit longer and get a bit more long-winded about this thing instead of just like cramming it into 5 or 10 minutes. And so this was great to really kind of get into the thick of some of the themes of unpacking this kind of work and how you go about it and how Christine went about it. So that's who we're going to kick it over to in a few more minutes. So as always, Sayward, thanks for the time and thanks for all your amazing insights. It's incredible.
Thanks so much for having me and for highlighting the Atavist. It's always a pleasure.
Now batting, Christine Grimaldi. Christine is a writer based out of Washington, D.C., and her work has appeared in Slate, Dane Magazine, The Toast, The Morning News, and she covered Capitol Hill for a Bloomberg subsidiary for a while, and now she has an Atavistian feather in her cap. So why wait? Here's my conversation with Christine Grimaldi.
Congress and the White House and all different sorts of federal agencies in D.C. With longer narrative nonfiction, with writing essays, with kind of stepping outside the box and writing stuff that really, I don't know, that like really moves me in a different way, that I'm attracted to writing in a different way. I can't ever give up on the politics or the policy of it all, because I really care about what's happening and how it impacts people. But I started a master's degree in creative nonfiction part-time while I was a congressional reporter full-time. And there is a reason that I did that, because, that's just part of me.
Where are you getting this CNF master's?
Oh, I finished it at Johns Hopkins, okay. But not the MFA program. I once told a a famous writer, or maybe it was a famous writer. I was at a reading and I introduced myself. And this was when I was like very new into kind of literary writing. And I was like, oh, I'm getting my MA in writing. And they asked, oh, where? And I said, Johns Hopkins, not realizing that there was a big fancy MFA program in Baltimore. And I just remember the writer saying, fancy. I was like, really? I mean, this was a time when like bread loaf was mentioned in the program, and I was like, "What's that? Is that like a snack or something?"
Right.
Like I was very much in the lane of journalism and had always kind of wanted to transition more into this kind of writing. And it's a whole new world for me that I'm still kind of learning about 10 years later.
Nice. Well, I understand you're a sentence thief. So tell me more about your sentence thievery.
Wow, you really went back into the archives. I think when I first started out writing more literary nonfiction, essays, what have you, I had a real reliance on trying to quote other people's thoughts, because I also, when I read sometimes, if I read just like a great sentence, I'm like, wow, maybe this is the jumping off point for something that I write myself, or maybe I could incorporate this with attribution somewhere. I've kind of had to break myself of that over the years. And I think I've done so pretty successfully. For instance, when I started writing the Paesano of Shame piece, I really envisioned it as like interviewing other Italian Americans with like-minded politics. And then I realized I was just doing a straight journalism, and I really wanted to just express myself. I guess I transformed that piece into more of an essay, right? Where I'm doing research and sometimes quoting from other works, but I'm really trying to give my own opinion. I think that can be scary sometimes. So I've maybe moved on from the sentence thief to someone who's just trying to figure out how to express herself in writing.
Oh, for sure. And at the crux of that is trying to develop your own kind of voice and your own character on the page. And by character, I just mean kind of who you are, how it sounds like you, and it's uniquely Christine Grimaldi. And, in that particular sentence essay you had written, when I fall in love with sentences in the literature I read, I want to recreate them in my own voice with my own content. And so embedded in there is trying to find your own voice. So as a writer, as someone who's looking to cultivate her own voice, like how have you started to build that muscle and to develop something that is wholly you on the page?
I think sometimes when you first start feeling a sense of yourself, you have a really, not a bad instinct, but just the instinct to shout it very loudly. And I did that in the first draft of the Atavist story, right? It was 27,000 words. And it was a lot more expressly political. About how I viewed certain things, that I found in my research. And with an editor as amazing as Sayward, she was able to help me kind of express the same things I wanted to, but far more subtly in about 10,000 words less than what I had. So I think, trying to figure out what my writer's voice is trying to strike that balance between, being authentically who I am, but letting that come through the writing and not worrying about making the writing shout it, right? Like it should just kind of be evident there. And I'm still working on that, but the Atavist editing process in particular was a very, very good learning experience in how to do that.
Yeah, that can be especially challenging when we're emulating people we greatly admire, who be they Joan Didion or David Foster Wallace, John Jeremiah Sullivan, people who are very pyrotechnic on the page, and you're like, oh, I like that, I want to try to do that. And then when you impersonate that, you find that it comes across as very labored. And then as you try to maybe emulate that too, it comes across as extremely showy, and so like you end up hijacking your own story by trying to be so artful, and sometimes you just really have to step it back.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite writers is Alexander Chee, and I was just rereading How to Write an Autobiographical Novel, and there are some more expressly political essays in that collection, but even those are, they're not hitting you over the head, right? Like they're really just conveying what needs to be conveyed through the words and through like these beautiful, beautiful literary sentences. So that's what I guess I've been trying to figure out and hope to keep moving in that direction.
Yeah, the not hitting the reader over the head can be really hard because you have to show a tremendous amount of restraint on your part. And that can come through the rewriting page. Like maybe you are overtly saying, like, this is what it is, and I am telling you how it is. But then through the actions that you can carefully report and curate, you can then step back the language and then leave a sort of liminal space there for the reader to kind of connect the dots that you have since retracted in the part of your rewriting, I imagine.
Exactly. And that's where the magic happens, right? Like when a reader is able to connect those dots. Like that's making me smile right now if you could see me. It's also hard because, I'm Italian, so we like to talk with our hands and just beat the horse dead. And I'm trying to really undo that.
Right. Well, I'm 50% Sicilian, so I totally get where you're coming from. So.
Boy.
Yeah, my mother's maiden name is Meniaci, and her grandparents came over from Sicily. So yeah, I've got that in me. The handsy talking and certainly the blood running hot.
Why don't you get this? Yes.
Now, here's a quote I stumbled across from James Clear's newsletter. It's kind of, I think this really speaks to what it means to be a freelancer and the numbers game that it entails. Now, I want to get your impressions. So he wrote, "The person who gets one shot needs everything to go right. The person who gets 1,000 shots is going to score at some point. Find a way to play the game that ensures you get a lot of shots." And I think that really speaks to there's inherent rejection in journalism and everything. He's referring to athletics, but we can really imbue that onto what we do. So what comes to mind when you heard that?
Oh, just the sheer amount of pitches it takes to get one piece placed, right? And especially the kind of writing I want to be doing more of, the essays, the literary nonfiction. It's so difficult. And it is a numbers game, and it's a numbers game, but there are also certain editors and publications you want to work with, right? Because you want it to be the best possible version of itself. And you know that it can be if you're collaborating with certain people with certain insight. But I remember, on my Paisano of Shame piece, which is probably the other proudest thing I've ever written, I think I sent it to 20 something places. And a lot of it was never hearing back. Some of it was very kind rejections from people who were interested. And at some point you just start to feel pathetic, right? Like, Why do I believe in this so much? Maybe it's not good at all. And I do think that there is something there, instead of like trying to gaslight yourself into thinking, wow, I'm the worst possible writer ever, which I think every writer probably feels. I do think that there is something there to taking a step back and evaluating, okay, like, is there a reason why this is being rejected just besides the media hellscape in which we live? Do I need to bolster this argument? Do I need to, tailor this piece of the pitch? Do I need to make something more or less explicit? But if you really believe in something, I think it is worth, taking the time to see, is this worth continuing to send out? And if the answer is yes, you keep going. And then you find that one magical editor who says, yes, we will publish this. And then the policy reporting is its own, slightly similar to that, because covering reproductive rights and abortion in particular, it's a very quote unquote hot topic right now. Since we are probably several months away from losing or Roe v. Wade being severely undermined. But even those stories can be particularly difficult to place because abortion for a long time has not just been like the third rail of politics. It's been the third rail of the media that loves to both sides it to death. So, it's kind of the same thing. Like if you really care about, a policy issue and the people who are impacted by it on a daily basis, I mean, you just keep trying.
Now, with the piece that you wrote for The Atavist, which combines memoir and also like sort of deep historical research. As we look to unpack that a little bit, I want to go back a little bit to what you were saying, having this having been a 27,000 word thing, came down almost 10,000, and you're saying about the editing process was really eye-opening. So take us to the editing process and what that was like for you to kind of see the light and get the best piece out of that initial draft.
Well, first of all, I love the editing process because editing means you have already written. You have words that you have to just make better, right? Or you have a piece that you just have to improve, but the words are already there. Even if you have to write new words, you have a jumping off point. So it was really thrilling in that way and exciting. It being my favorite part of the writing process. Working with Sayward was amazing, which is probably a refrain that you hear often on this podcast.
It sure is.
Yeah. So like I said, I think I turned in a draft that had everything in it, every thought in my head about the archival process, about the interviewing process, every, detail that I had uncovered over, 10 years of researching and reporting and interviewing on and off. So really the first step, and this is a testament to Sayward's trust in me as a writer, was, can you cut about 10,000 words? Because I think that this is what there is. The story is here. We just need to unearth it. And then once I was able to do that, she was able to come back to me with, some conceptual edits and some line edits, like build this out here, but more like, okay, like let's pare some of these sentences down too.
There's a part early in the story too. You said a decade after Nanny died, I quit my latest journalism job, in no small part to investigate what happened to the love of my life. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about your grandmother and the relationship you had that really springboards this piece into motion.
She was the greatest, and it's hard because I think that there is this Italian American, grandma trope of like the grandma with the pot of sauce on Sunday morning stirring. And I wanted to be very careful because she was the best person in my life. And to this day, remains so, really. But I also didn't want to glorify her. She was a flawed person just like anyone else, right? And we did have some opportunity to introduce a flaw or two of hers, which I was really grateful for. But, to be raised by someone like that, to really bond with them in a way that I don't think I've bonded with most people in my life. I mean, besides my spouse and some of my friends, but to have that with her, I don't know. It just feels like walking back into a cocoon. Is this all very cheesy? 36-year-old woman goes back, flashes back to childhood. That was one of my favorite sections to write because I really got to relive so much of that time with her that I really hadn't thought about in such exacting detail in so many years. I don't know, someone who just loves you unconditionally for who you are and who you could be someday, giving you that latitude, because I have changed in some ways, not at all, and in some ways so much from who I was when she was alive. But knowing that she would be probably just as in love with and accepting of, and not just accepting of, but celebrating the person that I am now. To have that confidence in our relationship and in her is such a gift.
And you write too at the end of the first chapter that she may have been shielding you from her pain, but she gave you a final gift, and this was a secret, and this secret which you took to be your inheritance, so to speak. When you started to uncover that secret, what was the sound going off in your brain as you were starting to uncover your grandmother's childhood and the conditions under which she was raised?
Ooh. Well, first of all, I have to give credit where credit's due to Sayward, who really championed that idea of inheritance. And I think that was a line that she had put in to the piece and really made me think about, having been given this inheritance, what do I do with it? Which is something that I thought about for the rest of the writing process and the editing process for sure. I think the sound that went off in my head was ding, 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 ding. Anytime I found something new. My therapist has talked a lot about like intermittent rewards, which is like how people sometimes get trapped into toxic relationships, right? Like with the person who just like sometimes intermittently rewards you, or like if I give my rabbit a treat, pet rabbit, his name is Arthur Fonzarelli. If I give Arthur a treat sometimes, I think he'll probably be more excited by that than if I give him a treat every time. Maybe this doesn't work for pet rabbits because, to be honest, he just wants a treat every time. I think it's more of a human thing. The point is, journalism is really hard because a lot of times it's just not getting the answers that you want or need. And so anytime I, found something about Reverend Mother or my grandmother, or if a detail from, one of my aunts or my uncle's testimonials matched up to something that I found in an archive or on newspapers.com or what have you, it was just like this big dopamine hit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like when you're panning for gold, you're looking for things like and you find that thing, you're like, oh, I doubt anyone's really seen this before, and now I'm gonna like tuck it into my little satchel here, and I'm gonna synthesize this into something awesome.
Yeah, so like maybe not the healthiest for relationships, but for journalism, I think it's what keeps us going, yeah. Right? Like, and I don't begrudge that because it is a really hard industry and often a lonely process, like lonely work, right? Like going to an archive with a N95 mask on all day to try to find like that little piece of gold, like you were talking about. And I think it is probably like the healthiest dopamine hit that you could ever get.
I think it, oh my God, I'm blanking on the author. It'll come to me and you might know it, but he's written several books. I think most recently might've been Fantasyland. Kurt. Anyway, Kurt Anderson. There we go. He wrote Fantasyland, and it was kind of like a history of America, but I haven't read it. I just have heard about it. But it's kind of a history of America, but like almost like talking about just how this place has been really, I don't know, a fertile ground for like grifters and charlatans and everything. And it made me think of Reverend Mother here and how. What is it about maybe our culture and maybe in the culture of the Reverend Mother too, where a grifter can really sort of take root in a community?
Is it appropriate to say, or maybe it's necessary to say, like the country's a grift in a lot of ways? Like when you build America on stolen land and slavery, and then promise a bunch of white people an American dream. This is maybe me on the soapbox again, but, there is just such a discrepancy between, the foundational principles or so-called principles of America and then, what is promised to people, right? And, even these, white immigrants who came in, a lot of them, the Irish, and then until they were assimilated because they accepted the grift, and then the Italian Americans who were discriminated against until they accepted the grift. There was a real gap between their daily lives, which I fully recognize were so difficult and harder than anything that I've ever had to go through, making like $1 a day, like sewing buttonholes. And then this American dream that they were promised, but it was accessible to them, right? Because of their whiteness, because of the caveats of the principles that the country was founded on. So I don't know. I think that America is like particularly ripe for grift because, there is that sense of it, or that concept of it baked into our democracy.
Yeah. And partway through the piece too, you start after a page break, say, how does a false prophet rise to power? And so how does a false prophet rise to power?
Mm-hmm. promising to fulfill that gap between, acolytes, reality, right? Like sewing buttonholes for $1 a day, and then this American dream, like, the term, and I'm going to butcher the Italian, but it was La America, right? It just came up over and over again, like in the reading that I did. And there was just so much emphasis placed on like how amazing that could be. So for instance, in, maybe this is a better analogy. In the 27,000 word version of this piece, I had a section that started with, that movie An American Tail? It's a cartoon by Disney from, I think, the 90s. I remember
watching it. Is it a Fievel thing?
Yeah, Fievel.
Okay.
Fievel?
Fievel, yeah. A little mouse. Yeah.
The Fievel Mousekewitz, and all the Mousekewitzes are on the ship to America, and they all start singing this song with the other mice from different countries. There's an Italian mouse who's adorable, but the song goes, and there are no cats in America, and the streets are filled with cheese. And yes, that definitely needed to come out of the piece, but like that was a really good way of thinking about how this was able to happen, right? Like how somebody like Reverend Mother was able to dangle that cheese and in her instance, the promise of salvation to people, to her own people, which is just really sad to me in its own way, right? Like to take advantage of fellow Italian immigrants. But it wasn't unusual for like this to happen at the time, right? Like I talk a little bit about Amy Semple McPherson, who, her evangelical denomination is still active today. So, say what you want about her, but she probably did fake her own kidnapping. And Father Divine, who did some amazing work, against segregation and for reparations. He also did think he was the Black Jesus Christ who needed money from his parishioners. And then he also had like these weird celibacy rules. So like some marriages broke up among his followers, but he took 2 Mrs. Divines or Mother Divines. So like, all of these kind of faith healers or religious leaders at that time who were dangling the, the American tail cheese in front of people were also making exceptions for themselves.
Yeah, you write too later, like what hubris it took to copyright a story copied from the Bible with that level of confidence. In another era, Reverend Mother might have been a televangelist or religious Instagram influencer. And it's like a play that she appropriates for her flock and everything. It's just like, it's so spot on that she would just totally capitalize on, with that hubris, and then capitalizing on the insecurity of people needing some degree of salvation, even if it means like splitting up families.
Yeah. And I remember being so excited to find that piece. It was at the Library of Congress. And I live in Washington, D.C. So to find that and something else of Reverend Mother's that she copyrighted like 20 minutes from my house was just incredible. But I remember being so excited that it was going to reveal something to me because there are so few things of hers, writings and these recordings that I've been desperate to find, but haven't been able to, of her on the radio. So few of them, if any, survive. And then I had my Italian translator friend translate the play for me. And she was like, this is basically copied from the Bible. And it's written in a mix of Englishiano and Italianish. I was like, oh God. But then what does that tell you about her? It tells you something different and probably more important, right? That appropriating or copying this tale out of the Bible, she thinks that she should get all of that glory, maybe instead of like the angel Gabriel or, Jesus.
Now, how did you balance the personal with the journalism in this piece?
I don't think I put too much of myself in the first draft. Besides the hammering home voice, right? Which was mostly in the third person. Like there wasn't a ton of first person stuff, if I recall correctly. So I tried to bring myself in, like when I was talking about Nanny, as Nanny, right? Like not as Jenny. If I was talking about Jenny, I tried to stay in the third person and really like let my grandmother and her siblings speak, because in a way, well, not in a way, it's their story. And I wish that they were here to tell it. And I wanted them to be able to speak, especially about a lot of the trauma that they had experienced. I think one of the only times I came in one of those third person sections as a first person narrator was talking about her assault by the chauffeur, because I wanted to like help pull out some of that story. She really only had a couple of sentences about it because I think it was really hard for her to relive. I tried to draw this distinction between, okay, like there's going to be more personal stuff that I'll write as and then there's going to be more journalistic stuff, even when it comes to my family, that I'm probably going to write, from this more removed perspective.
Now, when you spoke earlier about the secret being your inheritance, there's ways to look at that too, where someone passing leaves this thing to you, and you want to honor it, but maybe it could also weigh you down. It could be baggage, and I wonder if that's something over the course of writing this piece that maybe you wrestled with, or maybe finishing the piece made you feel lighter. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it kind of struck me that baggage, inheritance can be a gift, but it can also be something very heavy.
Yeah, I think what ended up being heaviest was feeling like I had enough to write, because as much as we talked about the dopamine hits of journalism being amazing, and my God, they are, I think it always felt like, is this enough? Do I have enough? And at some point I needed to write. And I love writing. I mean, like I said, I really love editing, but I do love writing. And that was able to kind of pull me out of, rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole of research, which at some point is not healthy, right? Because I'm never going to be able to uncover everything. And I think that's been the hardest thing to accept. And I mean, even having finished this piece, there are some things I'd really love to know. And I have delusions of grandeur of maybe some like 95-year-olds writing in after they somehow read this piece on the internet. You would be amazed. There are some really tech savvy like octogenarians and nonagenarians that I've spoken to over the course of this process. But yeah, I think like for me, that was the biggest baggage, followed by secondary baggage of a lot of people are dead. And that's just sad to me. I had a lot of help from genealogist friends and friends I made who work as genealogists during this process, who I am just eternally grateful for and to. And it's just, I don't know if they've reached a point, and maybe they have, in their professional careers of like, wow, like I'm mostly working with researching about dead people. And for me, that's still really upsetting that like most of the people are dead in this piece.
Now, we're recording this on a Sunday morning for me, Sunday afternoon for you. And you recently tweeted, when I say that 10 years of reporting and 16,000 words went into this moment, and this is Atavist teasing out your story, you said, I get excited, people. It's nearly time to read. So as a writer, as someone just in this mess who's pitching and getting rejections and then landing something like this and doing the work you did on this, like what does this moment mean to have this story out there?
I think it's flipped for me, because I think I told Sayward several weeks ago I was terrified and excited, but now I'm mostly excited and then somewhat terrified. That may flip again tomorrow. I don't know. I mean, I just have visions of getting everything wrong, but that's before any story goes up. And I mean, there was this amazing fact-checking process at the Atavist that caught all sorts of things, from like a misspelling of something to like 2 inverted words in the life insurance company title. But I think it is a little terrifying too, in addition to like, oh, did I get this detail wrong? Oh, did I get that detail wrong? To open up and to be more open about my views and more personal in my writing. Like that's something that I've wanted for a really long time, and that has been probably the hardest to get placed as a freelancer. And it feels good, but it's scary too, right? Like it's not just me writing about Congress now.
Well, you gotta feel like there's a feather in your cap here. Like you gotta feel proud for yourself, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I gotta take a deep breath to be able to say that, but yeah, I'm proud of myself.
Well, I hear like I'm someone who will, the minute something good happens to me, I will find a way to shit on it. So it's like I'm trying to find ways to like recognize when something positive happens and give myself credit for things. And I just want to, just hearing you say like how terrified you were, I'm like, I just want to hear you say what an accomplishment it is.
Thank you. And I appreciate you encouraging that, because like as a woman, I feel the need to like doubly shit on it. So, like as a writer and then like as a woman, like just take a huge double shit. But I think that, wow, I can't believe I said that on a podcast, but I think that saying that I'm proud of it is a good thing, and feeling that is a really good thing. And I think when I see it, I will really believe that it is all happened, like that this has happened from pitching it to publication. I just like can't believe it sometimes. Right.
Nice. And I just have one final kind of weird, wonky question, which I might actually clip and put to the beginning. But it's I'm a bit of a notebook junkie. Love notebooks. Yeah. I'm a paper and pencil guy. And, I think a lot of writers are kind of like this too, and especially reporters. So like, what's your kind of your go-to notebook? What are those tools that you geek out on?
Oh, I have very bad habits left over from doing a journalism every day. And I will scribble on anything. Sometimes makes it hard to keep track of things. Then I will collect them all at the end. So, I mean, like I'll scribble on index cards. I will start notebooks and then not finish them. I have a tendency to write, how reporters' notebooks go, like they're longer than they are wide.
Yeah.
So you tend to write like maybe 3 or 4 words on like one line, and you're like just kind of going down instead of across. Yeah. I mean, I even do that in regular size notebooks, just because like that's how like kind of my brain is trained to take notes. Stuff is everywhere. I have to get a little bit better at trying to keep things in one place. Organizationally, at least on the desk, they're in one place, but it would be even better if they were in one notebook.
Yeah. Yeah. My favorite notebook these days, and it's a little small, but I kind of like it because I can really tuck it in my back pocket and it fits there. It's the heavy duty field notes notebook. It's got a really sturdy chipboard. So it can take a beating, but it's also like a built-in clipboard, so it's not a flimsy notebook. Mm-hmm. And like I said, the paper is kind of small and you can fill it up really quick, but I really love how durable it is. Like Field Notes also makes a journalist one, which is like the long classic one, but it's and the paper is nice, but it's far too flimsy for my taste. So I love that really sturdy chipboard in that small notebook. And it, like I said, it's about the size of a phone. And you can really fit it in your back pocket super easy, and it's super sturdy. So I love that one. And like I said, I can geek out on notebooks all day long.
I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah. Yeah. I dig it. I swear by it. And it's just as someone who loves analog anything, it's a fun thing to use. It's a fun thing to use and play with.
Listen, when you've been on the Hill and you have to take notes in highlighter because you are just the reporter who forgot to bring a pen, like you'll just write down anything any way possible.
Well, awesome. Well, Christine, where can people find you online and get a little more familiar with you and your work if they're not already familiar with you?
Sure. I am a on and off tweeter at CH Grimaldi on Twitter. I have a very outdated website that I need to update, www.christinegrimaldi.com.
Fantastic. Well, Christine, thank you so much for the work and for the time coming on the show and talking a little shop. This is a lot of fun, and I wish you the best of success going forward, and I look forward to talking to you more down the road when more of your work comes out.
Oh, yay. Thank you.
Sayward Darby and Christine Grimaldi, everybody. Give it up. Give it up. Round of applause. Come on. Thanks to them. Thanks to West Virginia Wesleyan College's MFA in Creative Writing for the support. And thanks to you, the listener, for coming on this CNF ride. It's a different one, isn't it? It's a little wonky. One of the tires kind of squeaks. It might be a ball bearing thing. But we keep going, don't we? Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. Maybe consider leaving a rating or review wherever you podcast. Apple Podcast written reviews are amazing. Leaving a little rating on Spotify, that's starting to be a thing. Why not? They help validate the enterprise, as I said earlier in the show. Of course, feel free to share and link up to the show on social media, and be sure to tag the podcast at CNF Pod so I can give you that digital fist bump or my patented James Hetfield gifts. They are not patented, but that's kind of what I like to do. I usually have a parting shot of some kind for people who might be new to the show, and there might be, given that this is with Atavist, and but I'm low on time today, so you'll just have to stick around for episode 300. Holy shit, in a few days for a parting shot, which I put at the end of the show because I'm not a monster. In the meantime, stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do interview, see ya.